Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Sanhedrin. We are up to Perek Bet, Mishnah Gimel. Today's Mishnayot shall be Le'ilui Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Ranbai, Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Chana ben Miriam, Sason ben Rai, and Yoshua ben Shifra, Menuchatam beGan Eden, Amen. And Avdi ben Chaim Lechaim, with the Refuah Shelemav, Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, Betoch Shach Ole Israel, and the Achlama Merav Binyamin, Old Sion Chai ben Dvorah. The Mishnah continues to deal with the laws of a king. Met lo met, if someone related to a king dies and people are carrying the coffin to the grave, eno yotze mipetach palterin shelo, he may not go out of the entrance of his palace to join the funeral procession because it takes away from the dignity of a king to show his grief in public. Atana disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda says, Im rotze latzet achar hamita yotze, if he wants to forgo his honor and follow the coffin, he may do so. Sheken matzinu b'David she'atza achar mitato shel Avner, for we find that King David followed the coffin of Avner. Shenemar, as it is stated in the book of Shmuel, book 2, chapter 3, verse 31, V'amelech David olech achrei hamita, and King David walked behind the coffin. After Shaul HaMelech, King Shaul died, the throne was claimed by Ishbosheth, Shaul's son, and by David, whom Hashem had chosen as the next king. Shaul had a general named Avner, who had first supported Ishbosheth, but later abandoned him and made a treaty with David. When Yoav, David's general, heard of this pact, he suspected Avner of trickery and killed him. David was greatly distressed over the unjust killing and led the mourners at Avner's funeral. Although Avner was not actually related to David, David mourned him as if he were a relative because Avner was a distinguished Torah scholar, and the Gemara in Moed Katan, page 25a, states, when a wise man dies, all are considered his relatives and must mourn him. Rabbi Yehuda's proof is rejected. Amrulo, the sages said to Rabbi Yehuda, Lo haya davar el lefayes et ha'am, the act of David following the coffin of Avner was done only to appease the people who suspected David of plotting Avner's murder. To show that this was not true, David displayed his grief in public. In normal circumstances, however, a king may not join a funeral procession. David made an exception in order to preserve the peace of the kingdom and prevent a rebellion by those loyal to Avner. And the Rav tells us that the Halacha does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. The Halacha follows the opinion of the Tana Kama. Another law that applies to a king who is mourning, when the king's companions feed him the mourner's meal, Kol ha'am misubin ala haaretz, all the people recline on the ground to show that they too grieve over his loss. Vu mesev ala dargash, while he reclines on a couch, as befits his status. A king's status is higher than that of a Kohen Gadol. Therefore, although he too must sit on something low because of his mourning, he reclines on a couch instead of a bench. And that is end of Mishnah Gimel. Mishnah Daled discusses additional laws concerning a king. Umotzi lemelchemet arshut al pi bedin shel 71. He may take his army out to fight a non-obligatory war if he is permitted by the court of 71, the Great Sanhedrin. As long as the king has the backing of the Great Sanhedrin, he may force his army to fight even a non-obligatory war. And he may break through walls that surround another's property to make a straight path for himself to reach his own fields and vineyards, and no one may protest against him, stop him from doing so. No one may stop him from doing so. The path of the king has no limit, meaning he may make his path as wide as he needs. When a king makes a path through another's property, he may widen it as much as he requires for himself, his servants, and his soldiers, and they do not have to walk in single file. And during a war, all the people plunder the enemy's possessions and place the spoils before him. And he takes his share first. It is derived from a verse that the spoils of war are equally divided between the king and the army. The Mishnah teaches that the king is entitled to choose his half first. Afterward, the people distribute the rest of the spoils among themselves, with half going to those who fought in the war and the other half to those who remained behind to guard the camp. The Mishnah cites a three-way dispute about how many wives a king may have. Lo yarbelo nashim. The Torah in the book of Dvarim, chapter 17, verse 17, states regarding a king, he shall not take for himself many wives. Ela shmona esrei, only up to 18. The number 18 is derived from the verse in which the prophet Natan told King David that he was permitted to triple the number of wives he already had in the book of Shmuel, book 2, chapter 12, verse 8. Since David had 6 wives at the time, the prophet was permitting him to marry a total of 18 women. The second opinion, Rabbi Yehuda says, Marbehu lo, he may take for himself more than 18 wives, Ubilvad shelo yeh misirot et libo, as long as they do not turn his heart away from God, meaning they are not sinful, as the verse there states, he shall not take for himself many wives, so that his heart not turn away from God. The third opinion, Rabbi Shimon says, if there is even one woman who would turn his heart away from God, he may not marry her. If so, that a king may not marry even one woman of bad character. Why is it stated he shall not take for himself many wives? Afilu ka'Avigail. This verse means that even wives who are righteous, such as Abigail, David married Abigail after he became aware of her intelligence and righteousness, are limited to 18. So to summarize, the first Tana rules that the limit is always 18. A king may marry as many as 18 women, even if they are all of poor character, and he may not marry more than 18, even if all are of good character. B, Rabbi Yehuda allows a king to have more than 18 wives, provided that they will not turn his heart away from God. And C, Rabbi Shimon holds that a king may never marry more than 18 wives, even if they are all as righteous as Abigail, and he may not marry even one wife of poor character. And the Rav tells us that Alayev follows the opinion of the Tanakama, that the limit is always 18. A king may marry as many as 18 women, even if they are all of poor character, and he may not marry more than 18, even if all are of good character. The number of horses that a king may own is the next topic of the Mishnah. Lo yarbelo susim. It is stated regarding a king there in verse 16, book of Dvarim, chapter 17, verse 16. He may not take for himself many horses. Ela kedei merkavto. Only enough for his army's chariot, meaning that he is forbidden to own many horses, only if they are for his pleasure or glory, but he may have any number of horses for his army. The amount of money that a king may have is the next topic of the Mishnah. Again, book of Dvarim, chapter 17, verse 17. It is stated regarding a king, and he may not collect for himself much silver and gold. Only enough to pay his soldiers' wages. He may store enough money to pay the soldiers of his permanent army and the members of his staff. He may also collect wealth for any other purpose that is in the public interest. The prohibition the Rambam writes in Echot Melachim, chapter 3, Halacha 4, applies only to amassing treasure for his pleasure or glory. Another law of a king, V'kotev lo sefer Torah lishmo, he must write a personal Torah scroll for his own sake and never part from it. Now, actually, it is a mitzvah for every Jew to write or buy a Torah scroll for himself, as a Torah discusses in Dvarim, chapter 31, verse 19, and the Rambam writes in the Chut Sefer Torah, chapter 7, Halacha 1. Regarding a king, however, the verse states in Dvarim, chapter 17, verse 18, it shall be that when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself 2 copies of this Torah, meaning even if he owned the Torah scroll before ascending to the throne, he keeps that one in his treasury, and he must write a new one when he becomes king. When he goes out to war, he takes it out with him. When he returns, he brings it back with him. When he sits in judgment, it is with him, referring to a king from the house of David who is permitted to be a judge. And when he reclines to eat, it is propped up opposite him. Shenemar, as it states there in verse 19, and it shall be with him, and he shall read from it all the days of his life. And that is in Abotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.